Media is irrefutably a very important tool in our lives. Its job is to keep us informed and up to date with the things that happen all around us. It keeps us informed about the local events such as a neighborhood thief to global events like the American elections. It comes in various forms: print, television, radio, and the internet, including all forms of social media. While it has the duty to inform, it can also be a heinous tool if controlled by the wrong hands. It can create backlash, instigate riots, and tarnish good names forever. People have been reported getting hate mail and death threats due to their personal information being showcased over media, along with a few bad-mouthed words. Evidently, media possesses profound power. But where is the responsibility? The fourth pillar of the Indian democracy, the Indian media, which is supposed to act as the checks and balances of the division of power in the country, has been having questionable credibility in recent years. The Indian media is one of the fastest growing industries and constitutes about 1% of the total GDP of the country. Unlike the media channels in developed countries across the world, which have been shrinking, the Indian media has turned into an economic giant. There are over 118,239 publications registered with the Registrar of Newspapers, which include over 36,000 weekly magazines alone. Despite all this, there is very less variety of the content provided, with eroding quality and authenticity of Indian journalism, since a large proportion of these channels are owned by a few private conglomerates. This brings us back to one of the roots of the problem, which is the misaligned revenue incentive structure, where the main motive of private media is to commercialize news and generate maximum revenue for their investors, instead of speaking truth to power. This process, by which each channel is backed by a particular private entity, be it a political party, private investor, conglomerate, leads to the loss of independence, forcing these channels to incorporate bias and selectively excluding the reporting of any news event which may not be favorable for their investors. This is true for most media in India, with few honorable exceptions. This raises a very important question as to that if the people of the country cannot trust their domestic media channels, then where should they get their news from? While a large proportion of older people in the country still rely on traditional newspapers, a majority of youngsters under the age of 35 tend to rely more on online sources including social media, which, if not verified, can lead to further spread of misinformation. Therefore, what we need to understand is the fact that when different proportions of people use different resources to get their news, which provides a different version of the same event, then truth becomes subjective and people start becoming polarized to different sides, which can lead to a catastrophe for a democratic country in the long run. Speaking of things that are questionable, Noam Chomsky had mentioned in an interview once that the media in India is free and the government has no power to control it. But the recent protests in India against the Citizenship Amendment Act, which grants a fast track to citizenship for certain religious minority immigrants, have underlined the importance of not just the democratic process, which includes the right to peaceful protest, but also the role of the media in covering the government's response to the protesters. Media in India started to play a very investigative role and often jumps to conclusions in certain cases, such as coming up with conspiracy theories and murders. For example, when the late actress Sri Devi passed away, the media was quick to start coming up with theories as to how she died, so far as going to blame her husband. Professor Chomsky also once said that the Indian media is also not informative and leaves out a lot of things. India is currently ranked 148 in the World Press Freedom Index as of 2020. Many issues of the credibility of mainstream media is being questioned. The Voice of Margin, a people-driven journalism startup, published an article where it talks about how Indian media has mastered the art of distraction. In any which way possible, the media tries to divert the people's attention from actual real issue and shine the spotlight on irrelevant and unnecessary issues, that we as people don't especially care about given the current situation. If you take the pandemic, our healthcare system is collapsing. With healthcare workers having limited resources, GDP is at its worst. More and more people are finding themselves unemployed, yet, many major news channels, while slightly covering this, give more attention to political campaigns and non crisis related issues. A major criticism that Indian media faces is that they manage to twist facts and present it how they want. As per a recent article by Oxford Media, the coverage of the whole COVID 19 pandemic in the past 6 months in itself is a tale of lost credibility in Indian journalism. In March 2020, when Muslims gathered at a congregation in Delhi and later tested positive, the media was quick to blame the Muslims and made the pandemic a communal and religious issue, accusing all Muslims to be carriers. Hashtag like Corona Jihad and Bio Jihad was televised, instigating a whole new wave of hatred on the Muslim community, which was so wrong and false that police had to debunk them. This fake news led to discrimination and assault on the community. The main goal of such journalism is to keep the public away from actual socio-economic issues. India is second in terms of COVID 19 patients, economic growth of negative 23.99% is at its lowest unemployment rate is at 23.5%, and so many migrant workers have lost their lives. But the media continues to conceal this by discussing issues that either fulfill the Hindu nationalist agenda or digress society from actual issues. In the recent times, we've seen many instances that lead to question whether we get correct and relevant news. The press is supposed to have freedom to provide accurate news, to be able to criticize and analyze issues that plague the country. Yet, when cases of journalists getting arrested or murdered, the freedom is lost and news becomes more standardized. The continuous drop in India's press freedom ranking has been linked to the country's sedition law that encourages self-censorship in period of heightened nationalism. Recently, we have also seen that many people were arrested for spreading information about availability of beds, oxygen, etc. There is no freedom. Any criticism towards government is seen as anti-national and fear is drilled into anyone who dares to oppose. Recounting that fear, Indian media is writing a new history that recommends the death of critical journalism. News has lost its worthiness and the priorities are shifted from people to serve the regime and its supported business houses that control and set the agenda, all in the name of the freedom of the press. For instance, the case of Sushant Singh Rajput and the farmer protests. Sushant Singh Rajput took his own life on 14 June 2020. As we all know that there were a lot of rumors that he was coerced into committing suicide and were put blame on few others. This was the time when farmers in Madhya Pradesh faced a huge crop loss. While whole of the media community was busy covering Sushant's news and the alleged claims, they barely raised a voice about the farmers' issues. The farmers received support from the online community, even from abroad. For example, Rihanna, an American singer, tweeted questioning why we weren't talking about this pressing issue. Farmers in Madhya Pradesh, Vidisha, held a protest to seek compensation for crop loss due to heavy rains by placing late actor Sushant Singh Rajput's portraits at the site, saying that just as people wanted justice for the film star, they should support the cultivators. All this raises a few questions. Are we truly being fed information which has been censored and cut down to the parts that pleases the authorities? And as a country, are we so naive to put our entire trust and faith in them without thinking twice for ourselves? We have seen how media can be a powerful tool and how much damage it can cause if that power resides in the wrong hands. It has the capability to provoke, instigate, and endorse a war, and sit back and enjoy the profits that roll from it. We have been taught from early on that words are very powerful and we should use them wisely. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but your words may have incited that attack. We need to be skeptical of what the media forces down our throats. Is it the truth? Or is it just what they want us to hear? You have a brain, I have a brain. Let's think for ourselves. Let's not be hasty and make any rash judgments. Think before you believe and think before you speak, because the pen has always been mightier than the sword.